Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening. Hello, 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 hello. Good evening, Lady Barbara. Good evening, Prophet Jonathan. Thank you for going ahead and sharing this broadcast out. I know people are not used to me being on in the evening time, but we're going to be chopping it up here in just a bit. We're going to be chopping it up for the evening, but we will definitely have a special guest with us tomorrow. So I'm excited about that. Be on. So we are going to try to start somewhere between 6, maybe 6:30 at the latest. But we will be having a guest with us on tomorrow if everything works out and goes well. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles. We're going to get right into it because we have a lot to cover. A lot to cover. Withhold my schedule to check it out. Okay. So yes, we're gonna try to be on between 6:30 at the latest to actually come on with our special guest. I'm excited about it because he's gonna be my first interviewee for this year. So I'm excited. It is a he. So I just gave away a little bit of it. Um, but tune in tomorrow to find out who it is. Today, we're going to be reading from Stamped from the Beginning. This is going to be our last stop. We have finished part one and we finished part one, and we are now on part two of this book, and we're about to get into Thomas Jefferson. Now, you all know Thomas Jefferson, boy, we're actually in his region. I have not been to his home yet. I hope to go during the summer. They have, so I will definitely be filming when I go. They have spruced it up. They have uncovered um, Sally Hemings' room, which was actually near his, but it had been covered up and turned into a restroom to hide the fact of how close she was to the master's quarters. So they have actually uncovered that space, and it's a new feature. So I'm going to go see it this summer, and I will share with you all when I do that. So we're reading from Stamped from the Beginning, part two. We're talking about Thomas Jefferson tonight. We are going to finish up extending the master's lash tonight from Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America. And I got a whole bunch to say about that tonight, including what is happening in public schools, especially since I was just there today. And then we'll start here with a Black History reader by Dr. Claude Anderson. And we're going to be looking at what were the circumstances surrounding the death of Dr. Charles Drew and his invention of liquid blood plasma. And we're going to answer the question, as political concepts, are gender issues elevated above and in competition with Black issues? So, ladies, you will definitely want to listen up to that question. All right, so here we go. Growing up in South Florida, we actually had an elementary near my house that was named after Charles Drew Elementary down in South Florida. I didn't know the entire time that I lived in South Florida that that elementary school was named after a Black man. You would have thought somebody would have told us. Maybe our parents or grandparents or somebody, blink, blink. But anyway, I didn't find out it was a Black man until I got to college. I don't ever recall learning about Dr. Charles Drew in school, period. So let's talk a little bit about him. Dr. Charles Drew and his invention of liquid blood plasma. Nobody would be doing what they're doing with blood were it not for Dr. Charles Drew's invention and innovation. So just think on that. The other day I was in prayer, and you know what God told me? I thought was pretty funny. He said, hell for a white supremacist is finding out you're depending on a black man to save you. Just think on it. The Red Cross is an international organization that was founded in 1863 at a time when the country was engaged in the Civil War. The Red Cross had minimal contact with Black Americans until its path intersected with that of Dr. Charles Richard Drew, a noted Black physician. While working at New York's Presbyterian Hospital around 1938, he discovered that when whole blood was separated, the liquid part that contains the red cells and the plasma could be used for blood transfusions. The liquid plasma could be refrigerated to make it last longer and reduce the likelihood of contamination. Liquid plasma could be stored and shipped more easily than whole blood. Were it not for a Black man discovering this, there would be a lots of thousands of millions of people dying. Just understand that. This discovery made it possible to give life-saving blood transfusions in many more medical situations. When the London Royal College of Surgeons heard about Drew's blood plasma, they requested to use it for their injured soldiers who were in dire need of blood transfusions. He established what he called his Blood Transfusion Association to ship blood plasma to the British blood banks. Shortly thereafter, the American Red Cross took his advice and established a similar blood program in the US, but it went to the British first. Go figure. The federal government became concerned that within the American Red Cross blood bank, a white person could accidentally receive a transfusion of Black blood. Ain't this a hot mess? It's a hot mess. The Red Cross, aware of the importance of federal funding, directed that all donated Black blood be conspicuously labeled, then segregated from white donated blood. So much for the Red Cross. Military units were racially segregated at the time, and the government did not want the blood supplies, quote unquote, commingled. Now, these are supposed to be the people who have read the Bible, who should be understanding that we are one blood, right? Okay. Dr. Drew protested the Red Cross decision, arguing there was no physical difference in the blood of whites and Blacks. Uh-oh. However, both the military and the American Red Cross clung to their blood prejudices throughout World War II, and Drew resigned in protest over the policy. In 1949, both the United States Army and the American Red Cross reversed their racial policies and stopped segregating blood by the donor's race, allowing all donated blood to flow together. Why don't I believe that actually happened? Really? We think they just stopped all of a sudden? I don't think they did. Ironically, Dr. Drew died in a car accident in 1950. He was driving to a conference with 3 friends when the accident occurred. He was the only one who died, though. His death spawned many accounts and rumors, the most enduring of which was that he died at the scene because a whites-only hospital refused fancy love of blood, death and resurrection of Charles Drew. He was treated in the emergency room of a small segregated hospital where 2 white surgeons worked hard to save his life. He had multiple injuries and died about an hour after admission. Even though the facts do not match the myth, Love recounts the story of Black individuals who actually did die because they got caught in the circumstances of this myth. She says that even though the facts of the myth were not completely accurate, they reflect the reality that did befall some Blacks and that preservation of oral history has an enduring value. Yes, there were at the time Black people who died because white hospitals refused to treat Black people, lest we forget. So we are now moving into the last section of this book, section 15. Actually, nope, one more section after that. But it's only one question in it. Section 15 is birth of the new classes, birth of the new classes of individuals in America. Question 98. As political concepts, are gender issues elevated above and in competition with Black issues? There are some Americans, both white and Black, who understand how women's issues and the sisterhood have been systematically used to divide and impede Black progress in America. Absolutely. One such person was Eric Foner, a white writer who recited how leading white feminists and champions of voting suffrage for women in the 1860s felt about Black people. He quoted several telling statements that were made by the leading suffragette Elizabeth Stanton in the mid-1860s. According to Foner, Miss Stanton questioned Blacks having voting rights equal to a white woman, saying, quote, "Just think of Sambo, who does not know the differences between a monarchy and a republic, who never read the Declaration of Independence, making laws for white women. Lydia Marie Child, Lucretia Mott, or Fanny Kimball." She further stated, quote, "The Black woman would be better off as a slave of an educated white man than a degraded, ignorant Black one." Yikes! When white and Black women stand together on women's issues like voting and socioeconomic opportunities, it promotes an illusion of gender equality between the races. Women's issues are class issues, which are different from race issues. The feminist movement of the mid-1800s was primarily over voting rights to begin with. Contrary to popular myths, white women did have voting rights if they were property owners. The passage of the 19th Amendment in 1919 gave white women full voting and civil rights, which white women used to strengthen the electorate power of the white male. The 19th Amendment did not help Black women who had to wait all the way to the 1960s for the enactment of civil rights voting laws. So, yeah. Go and read some more on that. It is important that Black women who support women's issues do not become confused and divided from their Black male counterparts over gender-related issues. Once divided, they will be conquered. White women and white men play as a team. Yes, they do. They do. They do. And they do. Apparently, Sojourner Truth, a Black feminist as well as a Black freedom fighter, knew the difference between being a woman and being a Black person. After listening to a white man talk about how white women were in a protected class, she rose to her feet and asked, "Ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and have sold them off to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me." She knew no white women were suffering such pain simply because they were women. Today, when Black women and white women join together, both groups should understand the difference between being a woman and being Black in our society. Conservatives and liberals alike have successfully blurred the distinctions between white women and Black Americans. In form, degree, and intent, racism against Blacks is vastly different from class discrimination that women have received from the white male. Unlike Blacks who are an obsolete labor class, white women are essential to the propagation of the white ethnos. Hence, all of these white supremacist males who are upset about white women going against the fact that they are essential to the propagation of their species, of their ethnos. She not only lives with and bears the children of the white male, but more importantly, she has co-owned, co-controlled, and co-influenced and inherited nearly 100% of everything the white male owns since the founding of the country. This is not opinion, this is historical fact. And we probably should not be forgetting it. Blacks have held no power over white women, nor has the Black ethnos benefited from any gender or class discrimination against women. Equating gender discrimination and racism is like comparing a headache to cancer. It might be a headache being a woman, but throughout history, it was cancerous to be Black. Dr. Claude Anderson, Selah and Selah. All right, we are moving to Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America. How do we know that what Dr. Claude Anderson just said was true? Hashtag Barbecue Becky and any of the other hashtags that y'all want to put down at the bottom. Because guess who is making the phone calls under the arm of white supremacy? It's usually white women. And so you being a Black woman is not going to supersede them calling the police and using the police as racism valet. When the police get there, they're not going to be like, oh, this is a woman, I'm not going to bother her. No. Okay? Just want you to understand that. So, extending the master's lash. We are talking about parents and what happened to parents under enslavement. What happened to parents under enslavement? All right? Since the productivity and obedience of enslaved workers was critical to the success of the plantation economy, abusive physical punishment through the sting of the lash and other forms of torture was deemed a necessary part of daily life. Masters and overseers used the whip to enforce rules, to make slaves submissive, to break rebellious spirits, and to remind the entire enslaved population of the absolute power of white people. Children were not spared the pain of the whip either. They could be beaten for sassing a white person. They could be beaten for slacking off, or stealing, or fighting, or breaking tools. And so it was in the context of slavery that Black American adults and children were introduced to these ritualistic whippings with features that still show up in child punishments today. To be clear, not all of the physical cruelty meted out to slaves was driven by a profit motive. Plantation owners, drivers, and white women whooped and tortured slaves not only to instill deference and obedience, but also to vent their rage. Sarah Graves, a former Missouri slave, recalled that her master whipped his slaves as a pastime, while another owner beat a slave because he could not, quote, recollect ever whipping him. So he beat him just so he could remember. Other forms of violence included the rankest sort: amputations, rape, stabbings, shootings, brandings, and being savaged by dogs. This kind of sadistic violence was routine and often conducted in front of the entire slave community to teach a lesson to others. That's not just a Willie Lynch myth. There are other historical documents that show that that actually happened. Slaves were often stripped naked and whooped with switches and leather straps that tore open their flesh. Back then, whooping a child, whether done by depraved whites or Black overseers, was a way to get that child accustomed to the reality that he or she had little power over their life. The mere threat of a whooping was a round-the-clock reminder to be obedient and to work without complaint. Slaves were to be seen and not heard unless called upon. It's not a coincidence that reading these kinds of narratives evokes memories of some of our own childhoods. Enslaved parents were under tremendous pressure to make their children into docile field workers, and they had to do it as soon as possible. As the historian Marie Jenkins Schwartz notes in her book, Born in Bondage, white owners recognized the influence that slave parents had over their sons and daughters. So they urged them to subdue their children and turn them into these dutiful and submissive servants, or the master would do it for them. White owners and slave parents punished kids for different reasons. Slaveholders chastised children for their own convenience or benefit, while enslaved parents did so out of fear and genuine concern for their welfare. Enslaved parents were also required to teach children proper deference and demeanor in front of whites. Hence, things like you do not look at the master when he's talking, you look down, you say yes, sir, Mrs., etc. Staring at white people, rolling your eyes, sucking your teeth, talking back, questioning their authority put children at risk for being whipped by the slave owner or sold off. In her book, Stolen Childhood, the historian Wilma King highlights an 1852 issue of the journal Southern Planter, which gave instructions to overseers about how to train slave children. Quote, slave children were to be taught not to run and hide from whites, but to stand their ground and speak when spoken to in a polite manner. Polite slaves, as King notes, were expected to approach whites with bowed heads, downcast eyes, and hushed voices. Children who failed to keep up with their work tasks were whooped by whites and by their parents. Yeah, most of us know about that village whooping. That every person in the village who found out what you did wrong, you got a whooping from your neighbor and your next door neighbor and your neighbor next to that, all the way till you got home, and then you got your final whooping from your parents. Comes from slavery. Schwartz wrote about a 5-year-old Virginia slave named Katie Blackwell who was whooped for not turning oxen in the right direction. One Alabama slave child's mother taught him to pick cotton by hitting him with a pole when he did not follow her directions. Because the disciplinary measures employed by slaves generally pleased the owners, slave parents retained most of the responsibility for disciplining their children, as they often defended their right to physically discipline them without intrusion by whites because they believed that a whooping at their hands was better than one from the white person. The right to beat a black child is a privilege handed down to black parents from slavery, the only privilege they got from their white masters. Do I need to read that again? I think I need to read that again. The right to beat a black child is a sacrosanct privilege handed down to black parents from slavery, the only privilege they got from their white masters. The historical archives are actually full of these awful narratives of slave adults and children being whooped and tortured. There are images of slaves that have been strung up in distorted postures, hands tied with ropes, victims writhing in agony, bleeding, convulsing, crying, and hollering for mercy. There are gory images of skin stripped off the body from whips. Eyes are blinded, ears are cropped, cheeks are gashed out, jaws broken, teeth knocked out, heads cracked. Pregnant women whooped so hard that they miscarried right at the whipping post. These are documented whippings that can be found in the Library of Congress. These are testimonies involving infants whooped to death by white women just for crying. And there are stories of slaves being awakened from their sleep at night and whooped for failing to complete their tasks. The Reverend Horace Moulton, a Methodist minister, wrote, quote, I have often heard the sound of the lash, the curses of the whipper, and the cries of the poor Negro rending the air late in the evening and long before daylight in the morning. And generations later, you can hear Black people still telling funny stories about being snatched out of bed and whooped on the spot for forgetting to take out the trash or for not completing some other chore. Yeah. I will spare you further depictions of the graphic violence against Black bodies on the plantation because we are presently living in a culture where scenes of Black brutality and death play on a constant loop. But we must acknowledge that whooping Black people was always about asserting power and control, whether it's done by the slave master or by the enslaved parent. After slaves were emancipated in 1865, the rules of racial etiquette and the ritualistic whippings continued as a new kind of coercive labor system emerged that depended now on Black child workers. Once again, whites co-opted Black parenting to make sure it performed the same kind of function in freedom as it had done during slavery. With sanctioning from the Black church of all places, Black parents became extensions of the master's lash in order to instill unquestioning obedience to the rules of the Jim Crow system. Their reasoning was simple: to prepare Black children to deal with the chronic stress they would face and to keep them alive. Next week, we're going to be in chapter 4, and chapter 4 is Would Jesus Whoop a Child? Oh, we're going to have a great time with that topic. Would Jesus whoop a child? Black clergy on what sparing the rod really means. Listen, you don't have this book yet. You need to get it before next week. I need you to read chapters 1 through 3, catch up with us, because we're going to go in on chapter 4. Yeah. Who would Jesus whoop? Would Jesus whoop a child? If you've read your Bible, you should already know the answer to that. But if you haven't, join us next week for chapter 4. All right, our last text for tonight, stamped from the beginning, and then we're going to open it up for some conversation. Oh, I forgot to talk about what's happening in schools. Give me 5 minutes before we go into this book. What is happening in schools? If you have your child enrolled in a public school, I'm going to strongly urge you to go to your school, get a visitor's pass, and spend some time observing the day. Observe your class, the classes. You may not even be allowed to observe your child's class per se, but you need to observe what is happening in public schools. I can't tell you what's happening in Florida right now. I can probably tell you a little bit of what's happening in Virginia. I can tell you what's happening in Maryland. And what I see right now is very, very concerning. School that I was at today had not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, 5 simultaneous fights at one time. 5. I'm not talking about 5 little fights between one person and another person. No. 5 brawls of groups of kids at one time. 5 at one time. Do you know how many school resource officers that school had today? 3. Do you know their response to all 5 fights going on at the same time? The fights they could not get to break up, they just pulled out pepper spray and started pepper spraying kids. Yeah, that's what's happening in public schools. Parents had to come today. Parents were called. Parents were at the school, after school, angry. What else is going on in public schools? Students who have class assignments and they're not doing them. Students who have now, because obviously administration and teachers are tired of fighting with children, especially Black children. They're tired of fighting with them about their devices that parents have bought them. Sometimes they buy themselves, they have a job, and they want to stay on their device all day. Yeah. So rather than doing classwork, they're on their devices all day. They're on Twitter, they're on Facebook, they're on Snapchat, they're on Instagram. And what happens? Drama ensues during school hours on social media, and then it erupts into 5 brawls at one time during school. I wonder how we could resolve this problem. Perhaps by taking away devices, because they really don't need them if they have a laptop. But then they can still get on some of these sites on their laptops. So, what do I see today? I see teachers saying, we can't control you. We can't tell you what to do. But guess what? You go ahead and take the L for the day. You go ahead and take the 0 for the day. You go ahead and fail, because at the end of the day, they're still going to walk away with their paychecks. Yeah. So I'm going to keep warning parents as much as I possibly can. Some of y'all still don't get it yet. I'm going to encourage you to go find out what's going on in your public schools. Find out what the teachers are doing, because some of them are letting your children flat out fail, period. They're like, I'm not fighting with these students. I'm not going to tell them to put away a device. I'm just going to assign the work. And if they don't do the work, they get a 0. And they will keep collecting zeros. And at the end of the school year, your child will be failing that course and they will be behind. So, yeah. If you have the wherewithal at all to homeschool your children, especially if you know your child, again, is gifted and bright and is bored with classroom instruction and can work on their own, I would strongly suggest you take that route. That's as kindly as I can put it. Because what I see happening is not good. I did give a pep talk to the students that were willing to listen, and I told them, time is money. Right now, your money is your grades. Your grades are your coin. If your coin is not up, you're going to be broke in the future. If your coins are down, you're going to be broke in the future. If you don't understand right now that your grades are your coin, your grades are your currency to the future, you're going to be broke. And there are plenty of people, unfortunately, plenty of, let's just say, bigot-driven people who are sitting at desks, who are applauding the fact that your child is choosing to take an L for the day. Because that works out for them. Your child takes an L for the day, that's one less child competing against their child for resources in the future. Just understand that. So there's not going to be a whole lot of encouraging them to succeed. They're going to give them the work. If they don't do the work, they're going to let them take an L, because that works perfectly for them. Again, I don't know how much more plainly I can put it. Go check out your school and find out what's going on. If you have a child that's doing well, making A's and B's, still check out what's going on at your school. Make sure your child is being offered all of the opportunities that are available to them. One of the main complaints I heard today from students was the fact that they know that some of their teachers are racist. They know that some of their teachers give all the attention to the white students and none to them. They know that their teachers spend time giving the white students the scholarship opportunities and inside information while they get nothing. So, again, even if your child is doing well, I'm going to encourage you to go to the school, make sure you have scholarship information, make sure you know all of the programs that are available, because there's certain things called omission of information. And a lot of that is still going on. Not much has changed. All right. Thomas Jefferson, Enlightenment, chapter 7. Nothing fazed him. He carried tired mules. He pressed on while companions fainted. He cut down predators as calmly as he rested in trees at night. Peter Jefferson had a job to do in 1747. He was surveying land never before seen by white settlers in order to continue the boundary line between Virginia and North Carolina across the dangerous Blue Ridge Mountains. He had been commissioned to certify that colonial America's westernmost point had not become, like Jamaica's Blue Mountains, a haven for runaways. In time, Peter Jefferson's mesmerizing stamina, strength, and courage on surveying trips became transfixed in family lore. Among the first to hear the stories was the 4-year-old Thomas, overjoyed when his father finally came home at the end of 1747. Thomas was Peter's oldest son, born on April 13th during the memorable year of 1743. Cotton Mather's missionary counterpart in Virginia, James Blair, died 16 days after Thomas's birth, marking the end of an era when theologians almost completely dominated the racial discourse in America. The year also marked the birth of a new intellectual era called Enlightenment. Enlightened thinkers started secularizing and expanding racist discourse. Now, it's amazing that they keep using these words like Great Awakening. They had a great awakening of how to keep slavery going. That was the Great Awakening. All right. Racist preachers got together and figured out a way of how to justify slavery. That was the Great Awakening. I don't hear anybody in Christendom teaching that, but that's what it was. Now they're using this term enlightenment. These enlightened thinkers, the light bulb came on, and they decided to expand the racist discourse that they had now solidified in a theological way. They're now going to expand that discourse throughout the colonies, tutoring future anti-slavery, anti-abolitionist, and anti-royal revolutionaries in Thomas Jefferson's generation. And Cotton Mather's greatest secular disciple led the way. The first drudgery of settling new colonies is now pretty well over, Benjamin Franklin observed in 1743. And there are many in every province in circumstances that set them in ease and afford leisure to cultivate the finer arts and improve the common stock of knowledge. Now, mind you, they have all of this leisure to be thinking up racial ideas because that leisure is built on the backs of the enslaved who are doing all of the work. You know, the people that they call lazy once they didn't work for free, those people, right? At 37, Franklin's circumstances certainly set him at ease. Since fleeing Boston, he had built an empire of stores, almanacs, and newspapers in Philadelphia. For men like him who leisured about, as their capital literally or figuratively worked for them, they were men of leisure because someone was enslaved doing their work. His observations about living at ease were no doubt true. Franklin founded the American Philosophical Society in 1743 in Philadelphia. Modeled after the Royal Society of England, the APS became the colony's first formal association of scholars since the Mathers Boston Society in the 1680s. Franklin's scholarly baby died in infancy, but it was revived in 1767 with a commitment to, quote, all philosophical experiments that let light into the nature of things. The scientific revolution of the 1600s had given way to a greater intellectual movement in the 1700s. Secular knowledge and notions of the propensity for universal human progress had long been distrusted in Christian Europe. That changed with the dawn of an age that came to be known as Les Lumières in France, Aufklärung in Germany, and Illuminismo in Italy, and the Enlightenment in Great Britain and America. For Enlightenment intellectuals, the metaphor of light typically had a double meaning. Europeans had rediscovered learning after 1,000 years in religious darkness, and their bright continental beacon of insight insisted in the midst of a dark world not yet touched by light. Light then became a metaphor for Europeanness and therefore whiteness, a notion that Benjamin Franklin and his society eagerly embraced and imported to the colonies. White colonist Franklin alleged in observations concerning the increase of mankind were making this side of our globe reflect a brighter light. Let us bar uneconomical slavery and black people, Franklin suggested, but perhaps he thought, I am partial to the complexion of my country, for such kind of partiality is natural to mankind. Enlightenment ideas gave legitimacy to this long-held racist partiality, the connection between lightness and whiteness and reason on the one hand, and between darkness and blackness and ignorance on the other. These Enlightenment counterpoints arose conveniently at a time when Western Europe's triangular transatlantic slave trade was flourishing. Great Britain, France, and colonial America principally furnished ships and manufactured goods. The ships sailed to West Africa, and traders exchanged these goods at a profit for human merchandise. Manufactured cloth became the most sought after item in 18th century Africa for the same reason that cloth was coveted in Europe. Nearly everyone in Africa, as in Europe, wore clothes. And nearly everyone in Africa, as in Europe, desired better clothes. Only the poorest of African people did not wear an upper garment, but this small number became representative in the European mind. It was the irony of the age. Slave traders knew that cloth was the most desired commodity in both places, but at the same time, some of them were producing this racist idea that all Africans walked around like naked animals. Producers of this racist idea had to know that their tales were false, but they went on producing them anyway to justify their lucrative commerce in human beings. The slave ships traveled from Africa to the Americas, where dealers exchanged at another profit the newly enslaved Africans for raw materials that had been produced by the long enslaved Africans. The ships and traders returned home and began the process anew, providing a triple stimulus for European commerce and a triple exploitation of African people. Practically all the coastal manufacturing and trading towns in the Western world developed an enriching connection to the transatlantic trade during the 18th century. Profits began to explode with the growth and prosperity of the slave trade in Britain's principal port, Richard Mather's old preaching ground, Liverpool. The principal American slave trading port was Newport, Rhode Island, and the proceeds produced mammoth fortunes that can be seen still in mansions dotting the town's historic waterfront. In his 1745 book, endorsing the slave trading Royal African Company, famous economics writer Malachi Postlethwaite defined the British Empire as, quote, a magnificent superstructure of American commerce and naval power on an African foundation. But another foundation lay beneath that foundation. All those important producers of racist ideas who ensured that this magnificent structure would continue to seem normal to potential resistors. Enlightenment intellectuals produced the racist idea that the growing socioeconomic inequities between England and Senegambia, Europe and Africa, the enslavers and the enslaved, had to be God's or nature's will. Racist ideas clouded the discrimination, rationalized the disparity, defined the enslaved as opposed to the enslavers as the problem people. Anti-racist ideas hardly made the dictionary of racial thought during the Enlightenment. Carl Linnaeus, the progenitor of Sweden's Enlightenment, followed in the footsteps of Francois Bernier and took the lead by classifying humanity into racial hierarchy for the new intellectual and commercial age. In Systema Naturae, first published in 1735, Linnaeus placed humans at the pinnacle of the animal kingdom. He sliced the genus Homo into Homo sapiens, humans, and Homo troglodytes, apes, and so on, and further divided the single Homo sapien species into 4 varieties. At the pinnacle of his human kingdom reigned H. sapiens europaeus, very smart and inventive, covered by tight clothing, ruled by law. Then came H. sapiens americanus, ruled by custom, and H. sapiens asiaticus, ruled by opinion. He relegated humanity's nadir, H. sapiens afer, to the bottom, calling this group the sluggish, the lazy, the crafty, the slow, and the careless, covered by grease, ruled by caprice, describing in particular the females with genital flap and elongated breasts. Carl Linnaeus created this hierarchy within the animal kingdom and a hierarchy within the human kingdom, and this human hierarchy was based on race. I'm going to stop there because I want to pull up this chart that I believe I can find online, and I'm going to show it to you. While I'm getting ready for that, you can press the double smiles and we will bring us on for some conversation. So let me see if I can find this chart for you, for my visual learners tonight. Let's see. Let's go to images and let me see if they will give us some of those images. Yep. This is actually a couple of them. Here's one. He calls it, let me see if I can turn that. He calls it the four races of man. All right, this was one of the drawings that they did in the past. Make sure my YouTube audience can see that. Got a little bit of glare. All right, I'll bring it back here. Where did my thing go? There it is. All right, so there are the 4 quote-unquote races of man. Let's be clear, there's only one group of people. They're called Homo sapiens. They are the human species. There's one group of people. There's many ethnos made distinct by their genetic traits. One species, many ethnos, from many tribes, tongues, languages, and people groups, according to the word. Let me see if I can find one more while I'm waiting for someone who may want to come in. See if I can find another one of his versions. So this is what we call false science. Prophet, I'm going to bring you in. This is what we call false science. See that? So they drew these little pictures and made up their own little qualifications, on their own little scales. All right? This is why I constantly say racism is spelled Policy. Hello, Prophet. How are you?
Doing well.
Talk to us tonight. Where to begin, right?
I think I will say this. This is why I think it is so imperative for the involvement of Black parents in their child's education at home. And this is why I see the need for Black-owned and operated faith-based curriculum and schooling, because we are taught to be self-sabotaging.
Yes.
And we think that if you're not self-sabotaging, that you're a nerd and you're a square and you're not cool. So it's commonplace to call each other ugly, lazy, you're not this, you're not that, bald-headed, just all kind of derogatory, negative commentary, and we're taught to compete with each other, not work as a group.
Yes.
For the betterment of everyone. It's like my game is, I can't have game without you losing.
Right.
So your gain is my loss. So I have to make you lose so I can win.
And that,
it's just a lot of negative narratives.
Yes. And I was going to say that line of thinking did not come from African tradition. But it's I forget who said it, but they said it is no good to have a Black person with a African person with a Eurocentric mind, because they've been indoctrinated to think of themselves a certain way, and it's usually not good.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of stuff, even as adults, there's a lot of stuff that has to be unlearned that we took in. And so it takes work to do it. It takes people wanting to listen to do it. It takes people sitting down with incredible work like this, and reading it and digesting it and dissecting it and going over, because as you could tell, even in this particular section of our reading, he dropped so many other book references that you can go to check out. So this kind of work is not just for one generation. It's for our generation, and it's for us to keep going so that the other generations coming after us will be freer than this generation right here.
Yes.
Because there are things in this generation, I was sharing with a friend yesterday, I'm having to combat ignorance within us, along with ignorance coming from the outside. And that can be exhausting. For example, let me pull up another picture. Let me pull up another image that's on my page. Most of you have seen this image, all right? But for those of you who have just come in and do not and have not been on my page is Black Table Talk on Facebook. You can find this image, all right? I'm bringing it closer so you can see better, all right? As you can see in this image, blackness is not a monolith. It's not a monolith. But I had someone come and tell me that this isn't possible when they're actually looking at it. They said black people cannot be that diverse. But people say that when you don't understand that we are the original DNA.
Exactly.
And out of our DNA, out of our genetics, comes all of the other traits, all of the other combinations come out of our DNA, including white people. So, so every single day, it is a journey of correcting information that we have had in the past.
Yes.
Every single day. Prophet, you have anything else to share with us?
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
The whooping children
Mm-hmm.
book. That is so frustrating to discuss with some people sometimes, because people either take it and you're calling them abusive, which I didn't make you abuse anyone. You chose to abuse folks. So why are you getting upset with me for letting the fact, the reality of your actions?
Yeah.
Second, oh well, that didn't harm me. I came out fine. Like,
the very fact that you think you came out fine after you were abused tells me that you're not fine.
Yes, and furthermore, this is my most compelling point that I think the book says thus far before we begin chapter 4.
Mm-hmm.
How can we tell our children not to hit them, and then as a punishment for doing something that we said is wrong, we hit them, do the exact same thing we tell them not to do?
Exactly. Yep.
They don't, no one never gives a rationale or that's right. It's, oh, well, you know, this, you know, that. And it's just like, you're missing the point.
There's no rationale for it. There's no rationale for it. That's just like my mother telling me not to cuss while cussing me out.
Yes.
I grew up with that. Right? That's like a parent telling a child smoking is bad for them while they're smoking a joint. I mean, just if you follow the logic through, you're telling your child that nobody should have the right to harm them or do harm to them while you are doing harm to them.
Exactly.
And then you wonder why the relationship that you are trying to build becomes broken or becomes disjointed.
Yes.
Because you're telling them you have the right to protect your body while at the same time doing things to them in which they have no rights over their body. So you're in essence grooming your own child for abuse in the future by friends, by spouse, by boyfriend, etc. And no matter how we try to get around that, that is actually what we're doing. So if we want to begin to understand how can I have healthy relationships with my children, How can I stop this increase of suicide amongst Black children that we see increasing and increasing and increasing? How about we stop doing harm to them? How about that? I'm just saying. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for letting me share. I appreciate it. Hope everybody's having a great afternoon.
Thank you for sharing. We're going to take one more person at this time. One more person. Obviously, I know I have some people requesting to get in. There we go. And one more person. Lady Barbara, you are our person. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I have to have Facebook running in order to hear Prophet Jonathan. I can't hear him. I have to go on Facebook. I have to jump on YouTube too.
Okay.
But I just wanted to share. We were talking about whipping children, and I remember getting a whipping and being told this will hurt me more than it hurt you. And I was just thinking about how confusing that was to me. And then you slapping me around. And then when I get into a relationship as a young woman and I meet a man and he's abusing me like that, and I kept it a secret because I thought that it was something in my mind that was wrong with me. And I had to overcome the fact that was not the right behavior because my father was verbally abusive and he whipped us a lot. We got whipped with the strap, which the barbers sharpen their razor, switches and extension cords and whatever. And when I think about this, it kind of, the trigger thing, and I listen as you read, it just stirs up so much that you didn't understand. You were going through a lot as a child, and the abuse on top of it, and then being abandoned and just having him there. So there was nobody to really turn to. So it's like you look at the slavery and where all that, the orchestrator of it was slavery. When you read about whooping the child, I bought the book because I needed to read that too. And then when you go into Stamp from the beginning and you see the origin of it and how it all comes together. And then when we look at each other and you meet people and you can't talk to people, some people don't want to hear that. And I'm going to say this quickly. I have a neighbor live down the street. She's born again. She has a granddaughter, but her husband is not. But he curses in front of the little girl. And when she repeated, he whips her.
Yep.
And let me just say this. The grandmother doesn't like it, so she discusses. So, I'm an outsider. I can't really say anything to him. Plus, he has some other, issues. And it's like sometimes it's hard to reach people like that. And even living as a born again believer in her house, and when you have someone in your house that's not, it just makes it so difficult. And with substance abuse, it's hard to reach people sometimes. So he doesn't like for her to talk to me because he thinks that I'm going to influence her. But I would never tell her anything contrary. I know better than that. I lived long enough to know that you don't get involved in that other thing. And another thing I want to say quickly, someone made a statement about the Black historical churches being burnt down in relation to Notre Dame and saying they need the billions of dollars, but the Black historical churches, they are mom and pop churches. This is what the woman said to me. And why do they need these, billions of dollars, and where is it going to go? I said, those are our history. That's our, and I said, one person went to a particular church and posted it on Facebook and showed us the writings of how our ancestors wrote in their language in some of these churches on the pews.
Right.
I said, that's our history. When you talk, you know what, Pastor, I just want to say thank you. Because sometimes you think that you know people and their history and are they being enlightened, but they still sleep? And I could not understand. I said, why would you compare And she
Mm-hmm.
got real quiet, and that was the end of our conversation. But I just thank you for this daring dialogue and being enlightened, truly being enlightened and made aware of our history. And most people tell you sometimes, I don't want to hear that. That Black people, that's not my story. Yes, that's our history. And then if you look at our now,
Yeah.
what people are not looking at is we're still enslaved by this. And I remember in the 1980s when Apostle Frederick Price started teaching about this, all the white evangelicals that was a part of him with him, they disassociated themselves when he began to teach about the spirit of the oppressor.
Yes.
And so, and there's not many of them touched that, but I noticed all the white ones backed away from him.
They sure did. Lady Barbara, you are better than me, because you know what I would be doing for that neighbor? I would get her address and I would anonymously send her a copy of this book.
Okay. But she's not happy with it, but he does it. And it's difficult because he's verbally very abusive.
And that's why I would send it anonymously. Yeah. She would never know it came from me. But I would sure get her address and I'd be right over there.
Okay, I'm gonna do that.
Be set free. Have a wonderful 2019. Put a little gift card in there with it so she can go get her a cup of coffee while she reads and get set free. because she has a granddaughter. Yes. And so at some point, somebody has to introduce truth to her, even if you have to do it anonymously.
Okay, thank you.
Because there's a child's life that's.
But she's 3 years old.
Exactly. And the sooner they stop beating her for things that they're actually doing that's causing her to have that example, the better.
Yes, that's true.
Thank you, Lady Barbara.
Thank you, Pastor.
All right. Anybody else? Anybody else? One more comment for tonight. Anybody else? Lady Latoya, you have anything to share? You can press the 2 smiles. Oh, can I summarize? Lady Barbara was sharing with us about her neighbor and some of the things that are happening in terms of abuse happening with the neighbor's grandchild. And so that's why I recommended for her to send that neighbor, Spare the Kids, anonymously. Sometimes you can't reach people directly because they're not trying to hear you, but an anonymous gift works wonders. Anybody else have something to share tonight? If not, we're going to close at this time. Listen, I want to thank you for tuning in tonight. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness, so please go out and be light. Hey, Lady Evelyn. Lady Evelyn has popped up on our YouTube chat. Please go out and be light. I know that the sun is going down. There's still an opportunity to be light in the earth. Remember, we'll be on tomorrow between 6 o'clock, no later than 6:30. I'm going to try to come on because I will have a guest with me tomorrow. And so we're going to be chopping it up on different topics. And we will have it live so that you all can tune in to hear that discussion. And then if you want to chime in with the double smiles, you can press that and we will bring you in to ask some questions as well. Everyone have a blessed and wonderful evening. Take care and God bless.